Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are back with another episode of Daily Palantir. On today's show, we'll be discussing number one, Palantir got a new price target upgrade. This is the highest price target it has on the street at $37. So we'll be discussing that. Second, going over some price action for Palantir. Obviously had a choppy week since 27.50 2 weeks ago, now at 23. Went below 23 at one point today. We'll be discussing about why that's happening. Number three, Arnie, good friend of the channel, put out a really interesting post comparing Palantir's price to earnings, which is what people, at least the bears, say is something that's egregious, back to Apple's price to earning about 10 years ago. So I want to talk about that. And then finally, I want to go through if Palantir ever could have a consumer product. I know we've talked about this in the past. There was a really good clip from our recent Palantir Weekly podcast where we discussed in depth what a consumer product would look like, especially because Alice Karp was asked about if there could be a consumer product for AIP. And so I'm going to play a clip from that podcast and discuss in depth what it means for a consumer product to exist in the world of Palantir. Thank you everybody for being here. Let's get into it. All right, first thing I want to discuss is price action in the world of Palantir. Nothing too crazy, 23.70 right now after hours. Obviously, we peaked at 27.50, and now we're here in this 23.80 range. There's nothing that complicated to it outside of the macro. Definitely got a little rough over the past couple of weeks. We got a hotter than expected CPI. We got a hotter than expected PPI. So you get a hot CPI, hot PPI, which in the United States is the inflation reading. Stocks are going to go down. Bitcoin right here fell from 75,000 to 62,500 right now, basically a 15% retracement. That has also created some issues in the broader equity markets, and we've seen some stocks react to that. Now, NVIDIA just had a conference yesterday. I covered it live on my channel, so if you didn't get to watch the conference, you can click on the live streams portion of this channel and check it out. NVIDIA right here, 891. It peaked at around 930. Even it got back to 900 today, fell as low as 850. Investors continue to want liquidity in this stock. NVIDIA introduced a brand new GPU platform called Blackwell, which is a whole new way for GPUs to communicate with each other. Very exciting, very interesting stuff. Probably going to increase top line revenue in their earnings. Obviously, NVIDIA is up 800% from the lows in October 2022 and 80% year to date. It's only good for Palantir for there to be more AI demand, but in terms of Palantir stock, still up 45% year to date, not at the 27 level that it once was a couple weeks ago. I think that's reasonable. I mean, look, we're still up a lot this week. I think what we need to do is consolidate from 22 to 25 before we get Q1 numbers. If Q1 numbers are really good, we make the next leg into the 30s. Q1 numbers have to be pretty good for us to get there, or even moderately good for us to get past this 25, 26 range. But I think right now consolidating here, when we were stuck at 16 for 8 months is pretty healthy. And now it's just a question of when we'll be able to break out to the next leg of Palantir's price action. Speaking of price action, let's talk about an upgrade that we got for Palantir stock. So here we go. We had a fund manager named Brian Stutland, who is not that big in the fund management world, even though I have seen his name pop up here and there. He has upgraded Palantir to $37. And what he said here is he's a portfolio manager at Equity Armor Investments. He's highlighted Palantir as a promising AI investment. He pointed out the company's expanding role in the AI domain, particularly in the defense and intelligence sectors. He said they're doing more than just their cybersecurity for the government. They are really starting to become creative in the world of AI, which would indicate about 60% upside in the context of Palantir. Now, $37 is pretty ambitious. The highest price target we have on the street is Wedbush at $35, and then after that is Bank of America, Mariana with $28. So 37 would be pretty interesting to see if we can get there. Another thing he said right here is he emphasized the company's AI applications for military and defense, stating that Palantir is poised to become a significant player in this space. Once we got that Titan contract, I think a lot of analysts started to wake up to the fact that Palantir is going to be an exciting investment over the next few years, and really over the next decade, if you believe the DoD is going to spend more on AI in the military. Now, $37, that would put Palantir at about a $76 billion valuation. If we keep the current growth metrics at 19.9% year-over-year growth in top-line revenue, about $1 billion in free cash flow, and $2.68 billion in revenue, I think $74 billion, $76 billion would be a little stretched. I would think Palantir has to grow probably a couple $100 million more than what they're projecting to grow, which would mean about 22 to 23% top line revenue growth versus the 19% that they're projecting right now, 19.9%. I think that's very possible. I think Palantir is sandbagging. I think customer count is going to go out the wazoo, and I think that customer conversion on that customer count is also going to be incredible. So $37, is it possible this year? Yes. Is it likely? Maybe not if the growth doesn't keep up there. I do think $30 is very possible on a very strong Q1. That would still put us at about a $62, $63 billion market cap. which I think is reasonable. Even some would say that is a stretch, but I do think that's reasonable given the hype, given the momentum, given the premium investors will be willing to pay, and given Palantir's moat in the government space, especially if that can reaccelerate. So I think that's possible. 37 would be amazing. Probably a year out in order for Palantir to be able to show the growth to justify $37, but it is indeed possible. Just, a question of seeing if Palantir can execute against that. Now, speaking of valuation, one thing I want to show, there was a really good tweet by Arnie a couple hours ago on the question of valuation that I think is relevant here because we're talking about valuation and Palantir. So he put out this graphic that's really interesting. The caption is, you could have paid 320x price to earnings for Apple back in, when was this? Back about 10, 15 years ago, or 2004, sorry, so almost 2 decades ago. And you would have had a 78,000% return. His argument is this is why Palantir makes no sense at 260 PE has no sense. So his argument is, look, in the context of valuation, if at 2004 levels for Apple, you paid a 320x price to earnings, you would have only made 78,000% on your money, which is obviously a decent return. So everyone's saying, oh, well, Palantir is priced at a 260 PE. That's ridiculous. There's no way we can justify paying a 260 price to earnings for Palantir. Therefore, it's overvalued. The argument here is not that Palantir is going to grow the same way Apple is going to grow, or that Palantir is going to be even on the same trajectory as Apple. The argument here is that using price to earnings as a metric, as the sole barometer for how you engage in a discussion about valuation, is probably silly, and it's not the best way to think about valuation. Palantir doesn't have to grow like Apple does. Palantir doesn't even have to become, as big as Apple does one day. But Apple eventually had to grow into that valuation, and investors were willing to give them the premium because they believed they would do that. Same thing here with Palantir. You could argue that Palantir is trading at a premium, but if investors are willing to give you that premium because they believe you will grow into the valuation, which I agree, they have to grow better than 20% year over year. Right now, they're at 20%. I would like closer to 25, 30%. But when that does happen, they've grown into the valuation effectively, and they've more than justified the premium that they've been given. So in my opinion, and I think Arnie's making a lot of sense here, Apple and Palantir are not the same companies, but even Amazon is a good example. Like, you were paying a ridiculous price to earnings, almost like 1,000 PE back in 2014. It's obviously grown into the valuation. Stock's done obviously very well. And the reason for that is because you sometimes overpay for really good companies because they're always going to be expensive. You DCA into them. And then over time, if the growth story plays out, which you've got to be right about the growth story, but if it plays out, you end up justifying the valuation. And so from a valuation perspective, $37 price target, I think it doesn't make sense. I think Palantir just needs to grow into that. And that's why 260 PE right now isn't the best argument for why Palantir is not a good stock to buy. Okay, next thing I want to show you before we get into that consumer debate around can they create a consumer-facing product. Palantir did release a new video today, which is pretty exciting. This came out on the Palantir main page. They're going to be sponsoring a conference all around AI and defense in DC in May. Here is the video they put out about this, and this is the preview for why they're sponsoring this event.
The South China Sea is heating.
A North Korean nuclear attack could be.
In Afghanistan, the Taliban have announced
Tensions between the US and Iran are at
We should be so dominant that nobody can even imagine we're not number one. As with the Manhattan Project, which I think should be our standard. De facto, what we're doing in AI is equally as transformational.
American prosperity and national security are two sides of the same coin. We need to realize that M-Day was yesterday, that we need to be marshaling the full forces of America's industrial might and software advantage to deliver for the warfighter to deter the conflicts that are staring us straight in the face. If we need to be ready to fight in 2025, there's only a handful of new exquisite systems that we can field. But we can field an enormous amount of software. And we should not underestimate America's software advantage. Today, we want to convene all of defense tech to reintroduce the American industrial base to our pressing problems of national security.
This is why Palantir is proud to be the lead sponsor of SCSP's inaugural AI Expo. Every minute, warfighters aren't training and using AI is a lost opportunity. We cannot hesitate on building and deploying AI into the hands of warfighters. So join us May 7th through 8th in Washington, D.C. to forge the future of AI-enabled defense.
Pretty cool stuff. So Palantir will be sponsoring an entire conference. The conference is called the Special Competitive Studies Project, and they'll be there sponsoring it in the context of AI being enabled through defense. Now, I think this makes a lot of sense. Obviously, Shyam Sankar, we saw in the clip, Palantir's Alex Karp talking about how we really, really, really need more people to care about defense and to care about software advantages in defense, because that is America's #1 advantage. Sponsoring conferences like that are a way to get in front of very important stakeholders, particularly governmental officials, that are looking to procure software or looking to be able to enable AI on the battlefield. Palantir getting that Titan contract, I cannot underscore how important of a contract that was. It was our first prime contract. We beat Raytheon for that contract. That contract, I believe, is going to be the foundational framework to get many, many more contracts in the overall context of JADC2 over the next decade. And Palantir sponsoring this conference is another important step for them to be able to continue to occupy mindshare when it comes to AI-enabled defense. All right, last thing we're going to show for this episode is a clip from our recent Palantir Weekly podcast where we talked about if Palantir could ever build a consumer product. I know it's always an interesting topic. Alex Karp was asked about that at the latest AIPCon in a Bloomberg interview, so we're going to react to what he said about that question and then have a little bit of a debate and conversation around if a consumer product makes any sense and if it would happen and what would it look like in the world of Palantir. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Please make sure to check it out, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Let's do this one last clip that Matt posted, and we'll end it off there on his Twitter account. If you're not following Matt, please make sure to follow him. I'll put his Twitter link in the chat. This is Karp being asked about a consumer product on AIP, and this is what he had to say.
When will there be a direct-to-consumer, publicly available version of AIP?
Look, Palantir, you are seeing the tip of the iceberg when you are buying our product now. We've been working on these things.
You can't buy it if you're a person off the street.
Great. You are seeing the tip of the iceberg of our product development, and we are going to show more and more and more of what we have. And I think people, and I would also like, a lot of those people asking the question, by the way, are not academic. They are investors in Palantir, and they have supported us when we were down on the ropes. And those are the people that we are fighting for.
Matt, what do you think he was trying to say in that whole 30 seconds?
I think what a lot of people don't recognize is that these guys don't just talk the talk, right? These guys use their own products. They're creating products every single day. Before Apollo was rolled out, it wasn't like it was some lackadaisical sort of rollout. It was like these guys had been implementing it within their organization for many moons. I saw the same thing with Foundry. These guys literally live their life, and this is kind of what I try to iterate every time when I walk onto this show, is like these guys are iterating their life because they understand from a data-focused perspective. You know, they might not know petroleum engineering, they might not know aviation, they might not know rocket science, but they'll ask you all the questions that they need to be able to interlink because they're data-focused first, right? And to me, I think that they have so many applications and so many different platforms that they're going to unleash into the world. And I've talked about this many, many moons, and it's not something I talk about one-off. It's something I talk about very frequently. There's going to be a product that's released in 2024. There's going to be a product that's released in 2025. There's going to be a product that's released in 2026. Just like Foundry was released in 2017, 2018 timeframe. Gotham was released before then. You had Apollo that was released in 2020. You had AIP that was released in 2023. So you're going to have all these products and additions to these products that are continually added on. FedStart, all these things that OSDK, all these things that can be modularized and people can get their business up and growing as fast as possible. They have so many things that they can do. And not only and we just saw another product, right? This ability to network and be able to gather, they literally released that. That's something that's rather new as well, right? So they're always continuing to expand their product list that I think people just need to recognize is they truly, I actually made this joke before because when they came to our offices back in 2016, 2017, we were one of the first customers of Foundry on the commercial side. They were all using Slack. And I was like, when are you guys going to create your own application internally and do something like that? They're like, we're working on it. And I never found out whether or not they switched over from Slack because obviously Slack has now been bought out by Salesforce. But I'm actually curious. So any of you Palantir engineers listening, like Chad or anybody else, I'm curious what the hell you guys developed.
I can confirm they still use Slack. Because I've been told I'm a Slack emoji on their Palantir chats.
Are they really?
There's an emit emoji they click for some. I was just like, you guys are insane, dude.
I should send them my. I have some emojis that people have made of me in the past, like with me making sad faces and stuff like that. I should send that.
Dude, they watch us. Let's just say they definitely watch.
I know. But yeah, so I'm curious. I mean, these guys, they have products that they need to release for days, right? I mean, they're not just going to whimsically wake up one morning and say, oh, SDK is something that maybe we should put together. It's like, no, they've been thinking about that years in advance.
Yeah.
And so to me, I think some people didn't like the fact that he danced around the question, are you coming out with a competitor chatbot GPT sort of thing? I'm sure that when Palantir releases their customer or consumer focused product, it's going to be better, if not comparable, if not better, and maybe even more wild than is allowed. What you could think about is, and we've talked about this in the past, AIP is already kind of a chat bot, right? You are able to sort of link your proprietary data within your organization and be able to understand. You could have companies that are consumer focused that would allow their data to be accessed for the public. And then you could get better information, that might not necessarily be 100% open to, say, a Google or a Microsoft, but it is, say, potentially open to a Palantir because they are kind of the pipeline that allows them to be in connection. And so if that agreement so comes forth, you could be able to create a revenue stream, not only from the ability to have a consumer-focused product, kind of like what you did, Amit, right? Like something very similar to that, right? You have this proprietary data that you've come up with Hobbit.ai that any sort of company can allow, and it could provide a revenue stream to that company, because obviously you could put advertisements or what have you on that. There's a whole magnitude of different products that they could release that I think are consumer focused. And let's not forget what they showed in AIP Con 2, where the North Virginia highway system, and if any sort of the highway was down, if you have the application on your phone, you get a text message saying this part of the highway is down. And that's all part of the artificial intelligence piece. Like, how is that not consumer focused? That's consumer focused to me. So I think there's a whole different wavelength of applications and opportunities that I'm sure companies will personally come up with that are very consumer focused, as well as Palantir specifically that will be consumer focused. But to me, when you're looking at some of these things, and I'll stop after this because I know I've been on a little bit of a monologue, it's very much easier, as you've kind of shown all of us here in this room today, how many millions upon millions of dollars that commercial businesses spend to be able to keep their businesses up and running. So I think about some of the valves and some of the work that we do. It generally starts with a 7-figure number, not a $5 or $10 number, right? And so it's a lot easier to make and justify utilizing Palantir on that scale to a business that could potentially shave fractions of a percent or even several percentage points off of something that starts with a 7-figure number than trying to help out an individual, right? Then you're more so focusing on like the Walmart model, where you're trying to get more volume than you are margin, right? So it's a little bit of a different mindset when you start to look at consumer focused versus B2B. And so I'm just very excited to see what ends up happening, because I know something's coming down the pipeline.
Arnie, go ahead.
Before you mentioned Slack, Palantir can actually develop something like that. And actually, they developed something like that. If we think of the demo that was released last year, I think Gotham Europa had that chat interface, which even secure. So it was like a chat for military purposes, which means for commercial uses, it's just a copy paste. It would be nice to hear why they still use Slack. Maybe just because everyone is still on that. It's just more common. But the important thing here is not if they use Slack or not. But what I also shared this week that I think is a very broad consideration, but helps us understand the company better. Tesla doesn't only make the car, but is focused on building the machine to build the machine. Essentially, they want to be a platform that manufactures stuff that are superior. Okay, and the importance of this can be truly seen at scale, because then you can optimize production, be faster and leaner. Palantir, I think, is following a similar road. Palantir, I see that as software to build software. They spent a crazy amount of time, a crazy amount of resources with the brightest people to essentially build the platform, to essentially build whatever software you want on top of it, because you have a good infrastructure. And we have seen it with AAP, how fast that was to actually build something on top of it. Like 2 months, they have this new product that is completely changing the direction of the company. And you can do that with a fraction of the R&D compared with other companies, only because you spend so much time, so much energy during these 20 years with the brightest people to build this platform. Remember this, 10 million in R&D is not, that don't always deliver the same output if you have troglodytes into this expenditure. If you have 10 million with 3 people that are super bright, they deliver more output than 1 million of troglodytes. This to say, from this, we see Palantir has the ability potentially to build anything. If they really wanted to build a consumer-facing product, they potentially can build it. But does Palantir really want to sell it? I think they would be happy to build for fun, but I think it would be not the company focus to actually build that. But what I see in the near future to actually happen is what the newest partnership that was announced with Halo.com AI, which, by the way, the key people are also retail investors. Fun of us. This is essentially a platform that is built on top of Palantir, on top of AAP, to help people essentially maximize the value of their horses. And I think this is the archetype of thing that we are likely to see when we think of Palantir in the B2C. So essentially, Palantir being the entire infrastructure on top of which you can build a solution that is valuable, that goes to the hands of the consumers, but where Palantir is essentially the backbone that facilitates the emergence of these platforms. This is Meet Hailey, the world's smartest horse assistant. So I think we will see the explosion of dedicated assistants for each vertical. And I don't think Palantir wants to build like the general assistant. They want to build the platform on top of which any company with a specific focus. I don't think Palantir itself will ever want to become a horse specialist, but they want to provide the platform on top of which a horse specialist can build an assistant to essentially leverage the compounded knowledge that person, that enterprise actually has on horses.
Yeah, I mean, they want to solve real problems, right? Like you heard so many times Karp talk about how since the dawn of consumer internet, people are getting dumber and slower, and everyone was laughing in AIPCon, and he's right. And so they really want to impact on whatever they build or enable that to be built. It solves a problem, and most likely a business problem or outcome, and it's improving margins. So there's still so many industries and businesses, both large and small, that can benefit from what Palantir is doing. So I think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, the horse thing was really interesting, dude. I mean, I saw that last night and I was like, damn, horse insurance is using AIP. So I agree. Maybe B2C is not necessarily like a personal AIP on our iPhone, but it could be more so consumer companies, which is maybe this horse insurance thing is more consumer than enterprise. They would be using something like AIP. So small businesses kind of using AIP versus the, the Uniteds of the world using it.
I mean, maybe it was too small, but I would underscore built with Palantir. Like imagine how cool it would be if that build with Palantir becomes something that many people are proud to show